Hi, this is Gerard Virga, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 12 of the Florida Family Law Attorney Podcast. And today we have a good friend of mine who I've known for about the last 2 years. And she's the founder of Mariposa Law Group. And, how I came to know her was at a Florida Family Law Section committee meeting. And she busted into the room in the middle of the meeting and started to educate us on human trafficking issues and Florida law, and I think it was, if I remember, it was children's issues, and she wasn't on the, minutes for the meeting, and she got there early and kinda stole the show, and then, opened up a whole debate on the issue. Um, it was one of those moments that when you stopped and you thought about it, it really touched your heart and made you aware as a family law attorney that, there's so much more going on beneath the surface that we don't know about. And so after that run in, where I got to hear her speak, I actually sought her out and began to speak with her about all of these issues. And she's just a fountain of information when it comes to legal aid, legal services, human trafficking. And she's become someone who I look forward to seeing and meeting with every time that we have a section event or an opportunity to. And she just embodies community service and all the good things that lawyers can do for their community and bring awareness to these issues. So, with that being said, Betty, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, sure. That was so sweet. Thank you so much. My name is Betty Collazo, and as you said, we've met through the family law section of the Florida Bar. My background, I am the founder and managing attorney at Mariposa Law Group, which I founded earlier this year after I did my 10 years of public service working in different nonprofits, different legal aids and nonprofits. My experience within the legal aids had me working in family law, which means if you're in legal aid working with family law clients, you're going to be working with survivors of domestic violence. So that's where my interest began with that. And then from there, it's just been a lot of information. But I am super excited to be here today. Thank you for asking me to come. Thank you, Mary, for suggesting it. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Gerard.
Well, you're welcome, and we like to share our little platform here with people who do big things and people who are changing the way that people perceive family law or think about these issues. And we started this out as a platform for people to learn about family law, whether you're a professional and you haven't had the opportunity to have Betty bust into your meeting and hijack it and turn it into a free for all discussion on human trafficking and see all these attorneys light up with ideas and see their eyes get open to something that I had honestly never considered as part of my family law practice, human trafficking. So this is a great opportunity, and we're glad to share this platform with you and bring awareness to all the good things that you're doing, and that you're a source of information for people who are facing these issues, and that you're there in the community in Orlando and for help, because a lot of people need help, especially if you faced human trafficking, domestic violence, or you're part of a vulnerable subgroup in our population that, that Betty's there to help. And, Betty, takes it very serious and, is very passionate about these topics. And, that passion just kind of seems to boil over when anybody speaks to you. So I thought this would be a great podcast and one that would be not only informative, but interesting. And, to hear your spirited discourse on a lot of these issues. Betty, your career has been defined by, service to the vulnerable populations. Can you take us back and what originally kind of drew you into working with vulnerable populations and tackling these kind of tough community based issues?
Yeah, I think I was just made this way. People told me since I was very young that I should be an attorney, which meant I like to argue. I just had this really I just did not like injustice. I had this overriding sense of justice, and this is not fair. And I was one of those people that very early on had all the ideals of becoming a lawyer and doing the law and order thing and helping to be the good guys. And eventually I did go to law school to be able to do that. So I arrived in law school with my idea that I wanted to do public service. Actually, while at undergrad, I did so much public service at UCF that I got an award for volunteer, or excellence or something. So they took me in at FAMU, which is also a law school that is known for giving back to the community. And from there, I was able to make connections and learn and do my pro bono at school through the local legal aid. So what got me started, honestly, was that once I graduated and I had my license, legal aid gave me an opportunity because I volunteered with them ahead of time. And since then, it's just been learning opportunities one after the other, and always opportunities to help those people that I want to help the most. Still, the people that just it's not fair, and we'll talk about some of those things how it's not fair later on. But yeah, I still feel very much like it's not fair, and I want to do something about it. So that's why I do what I do.
I think every, lawyer at some point in their career gets drawn in with the it's not fair, and the struggle for justice. I've been doing this now for a little bit over 20 years, and I find myself more and more, sometimes conflicted about where is the justice, where is the pound of flesh, or where is the recourse in our system. I think that's something that initial fire that you have as a young lawyer about the justice and the why I got into this, that you have to come back and revisit it and get back to your roots, and kind of, sometimes maybe take a step back from your practice or whatever it is, and kind of, get back to that, because at the end of the day, when you take away everything else, from being a lawyer, that's why most people got into it, is because they're seeking justice. You're either seeking justice for yourself or for someone else. And my first case I ever litigated, it was in small claims court, and I was representing myself, and I was 17 years old,
My goodness.
because someone had hit my car and didn't have insurance. And I got to say, I left that not getting the justice I thought I deserved. And, maybe that kind of influenced me from that point forward, as I, wrap my mind around being a lawyer. But, kind of like I started out teaching kids who were in a bad spot, who were coming out of a juvenile dependency programs, and were getting reacclimated into a lower level program before going back to public school. And I didn't think a lot of them, when I heard their stories, had gotten really a fair shake sometimes. I think there were deeper societal problems that got them there that really weren't addressed, or probably weren't factored into the juvenile proceedings. And that's kind of how I started, wanting to help. And I went to law school. So I
Yeah.
think everybody's on that ultimate quest for justice. And yeah, I think your quest in some ways through legal services, you started out and is now blossoming at Mariposa. Tell me how those early experiences in legal aid kind of shaped your practice and shaped your current practice, and now that you've gone on your own.
No, yes, thank you. Well, it certainly has, because if you are a legal aid attorney, you are going to be dealing with certain populations, right? Usually you're talking about low income populations, vulnerable populations. And in my case specifically, was survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault or human trafficking. And you have to learn how, which I learned, okay? I was not automatically good at this, even though I am an empath, doesn't mean that you're necessarily good at talking to clients about really, really difficult things. Because even though I wasn't trying to, I was probably re traumatizing some people in the beginning. So, what I did was I learned from all those experiences so that I could be there and be of support and be trauma informed. And also, because I work with survivors, a lot of my work was empowerment based, right? I don't, as an attorney, as you know, Gerard, sometimes clients need a little hurting or reminding, right? Or you need to talk to them and say, we've discussed this and this is what we recommend. And this is what I really, really, really believe you should do. And sometimes we can be, like we just try and tell, we're trying to help clients, right? They hired us to represent their best interest, but sometimes they're going against their best interest. I learned that it was not my position to determine whether or not that was the right choice for them, because my clients were the experts. I may have been the expert in the law, but they were the expert in their lives, and they were
Right.
the experts in keeping themselves safe in those relationships and keeping their children safe. So if at that moment what they needed to do was drop an injunction because that meant that they could live another day or stay in the place that they needed to go to live in, then so be it. I am not in that position to make that, and I definitely should not be judging people for making the choices that they do for their families. But definitely, it definitely shapes how I handle cases at Mariposa. I come with a box of Kleenex, always with just to listen to people. And I also understand that the system is not fair. So I commiserate with my clients a lot of the time. I tell them the laws are not great to protect people in your situation or kids and your children, but I'm here for you regardless. So
I think that's an excellent point because as an attorney, a lot of times, we feel like we're in control or we feel like we have to be in control. Then I think law school, society, everything kind of perpetuates that you're the captain of the boat. This is my case. You have to remind yourself that it's really not your case, that you're just the voice for the person and the conduit for them to have their story told or to have the course of action taken that they want. And now I'm guilty of it. I've told clients several times, like, I don't know why you're going to pay me if you're not going to listen. Because I really am, I have been doing this a long time. I've seen this before. I don't know why we're rehashing this if I've told you what I thought. But I have come to the conclusion, I think to a degree, or try to let go. And I try to tell people. The other day we had a case where could have went to court and it was an injunction case, and in that case I was defending it and the lady could have won. I had no doubt we would have probably won based on the evidence I had gathered in the questioning. I also, had a side agreement that was reached in the divorce case that would resolve it without a hearing. And I just had to tell her that, I have everything ready to go. I feel good about it. But at the end of the day, it's your choice because it's your life and you have to go forward, with it and, let them make the choice. But it's hard, man. Sometimes it is so hard to let go and relinquish the control back to the real decision maker, the person that is you're trying to help.
absolutely. And especially, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's especially important when you are dealing with people that have been in controlling relationships. I
Mhm.
need to empower my clients to make their own choices because other people have been making choices for themselves, whether there was sexual abuse, whether it was domestic violence, whether there was just coercive control, trafficking, whatever it is. Somebody else has been telling them what to do. And I don't want to add to that cacophony. I want to be the voice that's like, I'm here to support your decisions, even if I don't agree with them. Because ultimately, sometimes they have a lot of good reasons why they don't want to move forward with it, right? Maybe they just don't want to talk about those things. They don't want those things on the record. They don't
Right.
want to say those things in front of other people. They don't want their children to find out about it. There's a lot of reasons why survivors and people make the choices that they do, and I'm just here to support them.
You know, you probably do a lot more of your practice historically has probably dealt with domestic violence injunctions and things of those natures. I mean, we do quite a bit of them, but I think coming from legal aid and then with kind of your focus of your practice, you probably have more experience. But even in regular family law cases where you don't have per se domestic violence injunctions, I think it's still a very common thread of people who are, whether it's outright coercive control or they've been in the relationship so long that they're used to making the decisions jointly or having to have the other spouse has made the decision. I can't count the number of times that I have heard, Gerard, can I go ahead and pay the light bill, or Gerard, how do I pay the light bill, or or things of that nature that you're kind of thinking, why, why are you asking me, like, if you can pay it, or how to pay it. you know the coercive control is kind of a new element to domestic violence. If I recall, I think it's a little bit over a year old now that it's been in there.
Kind of in there. Kind of in there.
That's kind of become a sounding board, I guess, for me, like in the divorce cases, because even if it didn't raise to the level of domestic violence or the person doesn't recognize it as a form of domestic violence, sometimes either the control by the dominant spouse or the control of how the spouse has separated the division of duties during the marriage, that you are having to kind of retrain, empower, to teach people to move forward without the other person being present. And I find it kind of rewarding at times when the case is at a point where I can say you can move on and you can do this now,
Hmm.
or hey, you're free to spend that money and buy a house, or you're free to do this. And sometimes I can see almost like the weight is off, that they can kind of be empowered to make their own decisions and be the masters of their own destiny when they've been in an unhappy relationship, or in some circumstances just a really unhealthy relationship, you know. So, you
Well,
know,
I think what the coercive control issue, one of the reasons why I said that it's kind of in the domestic violence law, is because it is in the family law. It's in the Florida statutes, and it's part of the family law section. However, there's no enforcement mechanism. It's one of those things where it's not a type of violence, it's not considered a type of violence under law. It's not like stalking where it has its own cause of action. And because of that, judges don't know what to do with it.
we had a case today. We had a
You
case
did?
today, and the person
Hashtag
argued,
some judges.
the opposing party argued coercive control, and um, the judge, stopped, the proceeding halfway through and said, I don't hear any domestic violence because coercive control kind of is not its own element, But then I also, on the flip side of it, I have cases where people have, come in and they talk about coercive control, and then it's not very coercive, or it's just sounds like, the normal dichotomy of marriage.
Right.
Like, before you go buy this, I want you to talk about it. And, it's a slippery slope, but you are right. There's no real cause of action or kind of enforcement mechanism for it.
Version is it's such a slippery, it's a weebly wobbly. It's not very well defined. And the reason people struggle with it, it's because I think in the legislatures, it's because a lot of it is the way that we're already acting. A lot of coercive control actually a lot of coercion is inherent into our a part of daily life. Okay. I teach at a FAMU College of Law, and I was teaching interviewing, counseling, and negotiation this last semester. And one of my slides had put under powers that somebody had as negotiating tokens. Power was correlated with coercion. And I was like, what? Like go back, coercion's bad. Power is not necessarily bad. Well, what they're saying is if somebody has a power over somebody else, that is an opportunity to use that to their benefit, which is exerting coercion. So you're not wrong that coercion is on a spectrum, right? Because it could be a little bit coercion in a negotiating tactic. Hey, if you really want this, then you would do this. Okay, then that's acceptable coercion. But if the outcome or what the other option, if you don't do this, you're using force, right? Force to maintain that person, or you are using that coercion to keep them in a situation that they don't want to be in. Now it's a bad thing.
Right.
And the other reason why I love to talk about coercion is because it's because of the years that I've been doing domestic violence work and teaching about it or speaking about it, or you said I burst into places just whenever somebody hear me talking about domestic violence and coercion is that possessiveness and that control, that coercive and control part of it is really the beginnings of the domestic violence circle. So you have somebody that's trying to exert control over someone else. And if you're trying to exert control over someone else, now we're talking about that power, right? That influence over someone else. And if you're doing that, what mechanisms are you using? Are you putting them down? Are you keeping them without money? Are you hitting them? If you're using any of those things, now we're getting into domestic violence. So you see, it's like the very beginning, it starts with words and emotional abuse. And I'm not saying that everybody that uses coercive control or is emotionally abusive or says mean things to their spouse is an abuser, but it definitely is conduct or behaviors that you want to check and make sure that people are getting the support so that they don't act that way, right? Because people need to
Right.
have healthy boundaries, and they need to understand that that their spouses, they're married and they're bonded together, but they're still their own person, and they're not entitled to grab their phone out of their hands or to expect them back, or threaten or else, because of those things do not a healthy relationship make.
Right. Well, to me, when I hear coercive control, one of the things I kind of wondered, was coercive control an effort to like put their arms around human trafficking type issues, along with like your smaller issues, like if you're not back by this time, or you're not doing this, then I'm not going to give you any money or take your phone. But how do human trafficking is one of those issues that's just so broad, which was really one of the things I remember about your kind of impromptu lecture that you gave us. I never thought of it in those broad terms. I thought of it in very, strict terms, as like forced prostitution, kidnapping, things of that nature. And then you kind of really opened my eyes to what it could be, even in family law cases that on the surface look very mundane, and you may have someone who's actually trafficked, in the family law case. So, I mean, what is your thoughts on that? Do you think coercive control is a way to try to envelope such a broad term, or do you think it was,
I don't think that the legislature has actually head on tackled human trafficking within family law. Actually, I'm 100% sure of it because that's what I've been complaining about. And that's what you heard me piping up and about. That meeting that, may I add, was one of many meetings that I interrupted that day,
you
including the
interrupted
executive meeting.
the later section I was in, you busted back in.
Yes, that's correct. I just kept showing up to every room. Well, because it's important that people are aware that these things are happening in our family law cases, and we just don't even know what trafficking looks like. Since then, I actually gave a human trafficking training to the Florida bar that I provided to them for family law attorneys specifically to show what those things could look like inside a divorce or a case that you guys may be handling. But the coercive control independently was gaining traction because of there's groups in different states that try to get unified codes or try to get laws that are passed in several different states. For example, Marcy's law, which is a victims' rights law, Florida already had codified and in the Constitution victims' rights, but then they still came around and got that. I mean, the statutes were like that. Then the Marcy's law got passed into the Constitution. But those are efforts that are being done nationwide, right? So,
Right.
and through one of our Florida bar members, oh my God, her name, sure, Robin, sure, she got me into one of those groups that deal with trying to change laws across the nations. And those groups were the ones that push stuff like Grayson's law in Florida, or we were able to back it up to be able to get coercive control on the books. It's not on the books like we wish it was because again, there's no actual mechanism. It's just one factor to consider, and then the judges just consider it, and they consider it's not domestic violence, like you said, and then that's the end of the consideration. There are other states that have it codified where it is a type of violence. States like California, for example, can't think of DC. I don't want to start naming the wrong states, but they are codified in other states. And I think that putting those protections in there would help strengthen the survivors of domestic violence, but also trafficking. Because the same way that I said that coercion was on right, that it's kind of like on a slippery slope. You have domestic violence, and somewhere past domestic violence, you get into human trafficking. But it could be the same set of circumstances, except that it gets to the level where somebody is completely controlling the other person. They're keeping that person there by force, fraud, or coercion, and they're getting some sort of commercial benefit from them. There's people that are being brought here and they are or they married, somebody gets married and now they're having to clean the house, take care of the other person's children from another marriage full time, having to clean stuff, having to take care of the farm animals that they're selling for a profit, not getting any money, not getting out their own car. I've had clients that have had no access to no language barriers, no transportation. In fact, in some of those cases, when the cops were called and the police were called to the home, the abusers would be the ones interpreting
But
for the survivors.
one of the things that really struck me when I heard you, speak at that those committee meetings was your definition. Because in my mind, like I said, human trafficking was kind of forced prostitution, sex trafficking type situations. And then when you said, when someone dominates the person to almost 100% control and there's an economic benefit, and then you kind of went on and talked about the economic impact that that has and the number of people who are in that situation. And I think you gave a hypothetical, as I recall, that always stuck out with me as a family law attorney. As a family law attorney, at some point in your career, you're going to have a case where one of the parties is either on drugs or has been on drugs. And then you may have the spouse, in your hypothetical, the spouse was saying, if you divorce me or, you don't do everything I'm telling you to do, then I'm going to go to DCF or I'm going to file for divorce and take your kids from you. And then they make the person do all the work, financial support, household work, and kind of just take total control over that person. And they use the children because no one wants to lose their children. Most people would give their life for their children, and they use it as a mechanism of control without there actually being any hitting or shoving, just threatening, just words, just setting the person up in the right situation with that. And when you start thinking about it from a family law perspective, the number of people, male or female, who are doing all the economic work because they don't want to, don't want to either face the other person's wrath or their kids are being threatened.
Just
It
the
really, it's a big impact, all the way around and in so many different facets. It's ever since that when I do my consultations, if I, hear that someone's had a problem in the past, someone's made a mistake in the past, I, kind of go to now, thanks to you, like, are they leveraging you with that? Are they threatening you with that? Is it bought up on the daily? Is it water under the bridge that you had a DUI a year ago? Or is it something that they're just constantly using to manipulate the situation to get you to do things? And like I said, I think there's probably spectrums of trafficking as well. Like obviously how extreme is the person going with what their demands are for their silence or their demands are to, you
keep
know,
working.
yeah, but at the same time, that definition really shaped the way I thought about it because I never thought about it in the number of years I've seen so many of those cases where that is I had a drug addiction. I went to counseling. I've cleaned my act up. I've gotten better, and they're still bringing that up every opportunity they can and telling me that there's no way I'm going to see my kids if I go to court if I don't do X, Y, and Z for them. And I thought that was, to me, a eye-opening definition. So how did you first kind of get into a practice and a calling to, bring attention to human trafficking? What opened that door and that curiosity to you and lit that what was that initial spark that lit that fire that caused you to burst into the committee meetings?
I was in, it was a job. I was doing my domestic violence work, and then the opportunity showed up at Florida Legal Services where I was working. They had just received a grant for education and for a lot of components with human trafficking. And that got me exposed to it for the first time. Then I started realizing that what I thought was something completely foreign, right? I don't know about you, but the first time I heard about trafficking, I think about people being transported across the border, right?
Yeah.
That is what I thought about trafficking. Well, traffic, it's in the car, but that's not trafficking. That is smuggling. If you're bringing someone across the border, that's smuggling, but trafficking is that it. I mean, the move to transporting people is one of the parts that can be trafficking, but it could also be recruiting them. So people that are on the internet trying to get people recruited into, oh my gosh, children are being exploited. They're going online, they're selling pictures, or they're meeting people and they're sending suggested pictures. And then when those pictures, the trafficker gets those pictures, then they use them to keep the person sending them more, elevating or asking for more raunchy stuff, or more pictures or more videos, and they just keep escalating the abuse because the threat is, we're going to show your parents, we're going to show your school, we're going to disseminate this, and in order for me to keep this private, you're going to have to continue doing this. So that's a type of, that's trafficking too. There's no driving. There's trafficking in marriages where you have one spouse that's forcing the other to do online pornography. That's trafficking as well.
And I'm gonna tell you this. This is a fact pattern that I heard probably about a little bit over a year ago, and it kind of reminded me of our conversations. It was a teenage boy. It was a female on the other side. The female got the first raunchy picture delivered via text and then kept escalating it. So, a lot of times, when we think about these things, we think, maybe I'm old, maybe I'm gender biased, but you kind of sometimes think, well, the guy is the one who's asking for the raunchy pictures and doing the controlling. But in this circumstance, the person that was doing the control or trafficking was the female who was slightly older and was doing it with a younger teenage boy to the point where the boy was about to commit suicide
Oh my goodness.
because of the threat because he didn't want to be outed or in that way. And it does not have we have to learn to put our blinders, our societal blinders down and look at it from all angles and all genders, and everybody could become a victim of this. Another fact pattern I heard um, in the last year or two since we spoke was in this circumstance, it was the male, and the male had introduced the female to drugs. And
Classic.
the male really didn't even use the drugs or wasn't addicted to them. It was
Of
not,
course. That's
I don't know
part
if
of the
didn't
scheme.
become addicted or didn't partake maybe, or thought they were partaking together and they really weren't partaking together. And that was the control factor by getting the person addicted to the drugs and then having all the evidence and information to ruin them. And that became a source of the control, reached a level that, the person had no more free will.
Mhm. And that's one of the ways that they do it. It's through people that are particularly vulnerable are people with mental health issues, people with a pre-existing trauma because they're going to bond to people with drug issues. But you're not wrong, and that was not by accident, Gerard. That the trafficker was not addicted. No, he got the person addicted because now it makes them dependent, or it makes them embarrassed. It makes them dependent to get the drugs. It makes them dependent. And if there's children involved, right? They go, if you don't do this, I'm going to contact DCF. You won't be able to see your children, or I'm going to have you deported and you won't be able to see your children. See all the
Right.
things that people can use as power over somebody else. Yeah, but that's one of the typical things that they do. And one of the things I wanted to mention was earlier you were talking about the court cases of the people, the injustices that you see. Absolutely. There's different justice for different people at different levels. You go to a dependency court, you go to juvenile court, and that's a poor people court, for lack of better way of looking at it. In fact, I heard that from a judge that did dependency work. He's like, we know that this is like, we are indicting people because they lack the resources. There's people there that are being trafficked. A lot of the clients that I had when I was in the human trafficking branch were survivors who had been trafficked during the time that they had young children. There were drugs involved, and they lost their children because of that, or the children were placed. Sometimes the children are placed with the traffickers because they
Right.
don't have a record. They're not doing drugs. They're not being arrested. They're just the ones that are doing everything.
I've actually seen that scenario. Not that I do a lot of dependency. I have seen that scenario play out where the initial wrongdoer who ensnared the person into this trap then is actually the one who comes out smelling like a rose in the legal system, and the actual justice falls short of going back to the actual root cause of the problem. It stops at the first place it can and doesn't look beyond that, and it doesn't really sometimes deal not only with the root problem but also deal with why is the person in this situation in the first place. Identify why the kids I taught. Why is the kid in this situation in the first place? Because there are no bad kids. Kids don't and are not inherently bad, in my opinion.
I agree.
What got them there, and what resources do we need to put in place to not necessarily punish, but to rehabilitate or to mitigate the damage that's already been caused so that they're not continuously back in this pattern of either trauma, neglect, control. One case I remember, in this case really is what kind of pushed me to law school. It was an account of a young man who was very upstanding, and I could not understand for the life of me how he became part of the system. And at first he wouldn't open up about it. And then finally, when he opened up, he was a drug mule. He was carting drugs on his bicycle doing the delivery because the adults in his life knew that the worst that would happen to him is he'd go to juvie and end up in a program like with me, and then instead of going to prison, so he was the one, the target, the lightning rod of the operation. And he was a delivery person. And that was one of the things that really motivated me, because maybe if somebody had got down to the root cause of the problem, maybe, how can you commit a crime if you're coerced into committing the crime? Like you're being forced,
That's
not your own
trafficking.
free will. Yeah.
That's trafficking. You're describing trafficking. That's actually, you look at that. A case related to trafficking is what got you, into trying to become a lawyer. I mean, the parents, and that actually happens. Sometimes people from Central America, South America will send their kids, not with drugs necessarily, but specifically to work, to send money back, and they have no choice about that. And they're being sent with people that they're not even related to, so they're not going to school either. There's a lot of different ways that trafficking can affect families, but yeah, what you're describing is one of them. And let me. Have you ever heard of Have you ever heard of polyvictimization?
No, I have not. That's a new one.
Yeah, this I learned about it a couple of years ago, and there's some trainings online. Maybe I'll be able to research them and find. I think it's the Center for Family Justice, maybe, or the Institute for Family something. I have to look it up. But they got a grant, and they were doing research into polyvictimization, which is the theory. The working theory is that people that suffer, that are in juvie, or that are in family courts, or that are in jail, they usually fall within four paths of polyvictimization. That means that they've been victimized over and over, right? One is you are in a house. The four paths are: one, you are in a household where your parents are abusive. right? You are directly being abused, and then that leads to peer abusing you, and then that leads to polyvictimization because you've been a precondition for that. Another one is when your parents are abusive. There's just domestic violence and instability in the home, or a mental health illness of the parents. That's another path you get, because if your parents are not paying attention because they can't because of mental health illnesses, then you're more likely to be bullied, peer victimization, and then polyvictimization. Same thing if you have, I said mental health illness, and the last one is unsafe neighborhoods is the other one. So even if you have parents, the other one is abuse, neglect, right? So if your parents are just like completely neglectful, and unsafe neighborhoods, even if your parents are on top of you and they're taking care of you, if you're in unsafe neighborhoods where you're exposed to prostitution, drug use, guns going off, that's still going to put you in a situation where you're going to likely fall into peer abuse and then later into polyvictimization. So what I did find was that a lot of the people that I work with that are trafficked or have domestic violence have been polyvictimized. This starts from early. This
Right.
starts with how parents are treating their children. This starts with how parents are protecting their children against other kids abusing them, or against other, I don't know, I'd say bullying. I've been watching this show that was set in the 80s. I'm like, in the 80s, bullying was so, so bad, and I grew up in the 80s and 90s. That's what really, like, you see a lot of the people now, if you ask them and you start digging into their past, and there's actually questionnaires that go into this that explore these things, what has happened recently and what has happened ever in your life. And then you see these patterns. It's like we need to provide the support to people when we identify them early on, because otherwise they're going to end up in court. In fact, there's studies that have been conducted that these people that have these polyvictimizations, they are going to be costing the court system later on more resources in the government, because they are the ones that keep going back to court. They're the ones that don't understand the judge's rulings. They're the ones that keep being thrown in contempt. They're the ones showing up in courts, in all the courts.
You
So
know, that seems to be kind of becoming a recurring theme of a lot of these shows. Is reminds me of that old saying: a penny worth of precaution is worth a dollar worth of cure. And
mhm.
getting to the root cause early, and then actually having the legislator and the court system aligned and funded with programs to actually assist with the root cause of the problems early is so much better than paying for prison cells, repeat dependency cases. um the overall cost on the taxpayer, in my opinion, probably would be better off addressing the root problems early on and dealing with the root problems early on, and then dealing with people as people, and getting down to what can we really do to break these cycles and to break these chains that keep tying these individuals into the legal system, and and getting them in a place where they need to be. And I agree with you that in a lot of these cases that I've dealt with, especially with domestic violence, a lot of times when you really do get to know the person, it's very obvious that it goes back to their childhood. It goes back to their early formative relationships. And, I applaud them when they file the injunction, and they take the first steps to maybe breaking that cycle. But it often traces all the way back to their childhood, and things that you wouldn't even factor in, like if you weren't really looking at it through the microscope with an open mind. There are just so many root causes of this.
Have you ever looked at your clients and just gone like, or maybe not your clients, but other people's clients, and or a case, and you can just see that they're acting like children. They're just not being reasonable. Honestly, that's what we all are. We are just children that grew into these bodies, but our minds are sometimes stuck at whatever level, right? If we had a lot of trauma or a lot of neglect or whatever things that we had to fend for ourselves back then, that's not efforts that we, whatever wasn't poured into us, now we're going to have to pour for ourselves, or we lack it when we're in court as grown people.
Right.
So even though, like, especially as an advocate for domestic violence survivors, is that, and human trafficking, is that the trend is restorative justice, which is not about punishing the other person, because that person that's doing that bad stuff or making those bad choices, they are just another hurt child that's in a grown body with a child mind and needs support to be able to do better. And that's where the restorative justice comes in, because we don't want to be punishing people. We just want them to do better. Right.
Well,
And
I like that term. I've never really explored that or heard that. But, you know, and if you think about it in these situations where there's injunctions, at the end of the day, people ask me, well, what happens? I'm like, well, the judge either says the injunction's granted or denied. I was like, it's like the other day, like I was trying to explain it to a person and they were kind of struggling with it. And I actually took the light switch, flipped it up, flipped it down. I was like, it's either on or it's off. It's either the injunction's on and it's granted, or it's off and it's not. That's all you're going to hear. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really do anything to educate the victim on how not to fall back into these circumstances or how to protect themselves from these circumstances. And it doesn't offer any help to the person who's maybe has anger management issues or is going through something psychologically where they're not thinking clear. And to get those problems addressed, it's just stay away, thank you, leave my courtroom. But the underlying problem is not addressed except for the immediate just don't get near each other.
And those
And
people will
I tell
still.
people all the time too, like one of my big concerns with injunctions is if I'm going to file one before somebody and I'm going to be the petitioner, I explain to them a sheet of paper is just a sheet of paper. And you still call 911 and you tell them I have an injunction. Maybe they'll get there faster, maybe they won't. I can't tell you if the cops will get there faster or not. I do know it's its own independent, crime to break an injunction, but at the end of the day, I have law books all in my office, and those are all sheets of paper, and those things get broken daily. So, is this really what you want to do? Is this really the best mechanism to get you out of the situation, or would it be better to move? Would it be better to explore other options for you? Maybe in concert with the injunction. But yeah, but there's no in domestic violence court as I know. I've never seen a judge in my 20 years order any type of lying programs, anything like that to really try to not only put a band-aid on the problem, but actually fix the root problem where maybe this won't repeat, or maybe these people get the help that they need. The victim needs help, obviously he needs protection. The person who's exercising the uh, abuse or coercive control, they're obviously going through something or maybe need some classes, counseling, etc. to do this. But if you think about it from an injunction, even if the injunction works, they stay away. They then go back into another relationship. Maybe they're lucky, maybe they're not. Maybe they fall back into the same pattern because they think that's normal
Mhm.
and they're back in an abusive relationship, or the abuser never really becomes self-aware of the problem and is right back in domestic violence. A lot of the times when I see cases where we're defending someone who's been accused of domestic violence, I'm shocked when I go to the docket and I see that there's multiple throughout years from different partners, or, because it's definitely a pattern. And that even though they've interacted with the court system, 5 times with 5 different, there's no therapeutic, restorative
No.
mechanism being implemented to try to address the underlying problem and maybe teach the person coping skills so they don't continue to go out and do this. That's my thing. I probably wouldn't be a good legislator because I would probably have a sober budget really quick with programs and
Mhm.
restorative justice and
Well,
therapeutic
we need that.
processes.
But we need that. Listen, what you're saying is so right because I've seen that. Like the people that are the survivors, they've had injunctions filed against other people. If they're, the thing is, yes, it would be great if we had the resources. So if we came up with something, where maybe we can do a class or something. I mean, they came up with veterans intervention. That was a step in trying to do something to start getting at the root of the problem, right? But it's not just a one person problem because there's two people in the relationship, and I'm not saying that the survivor or the protective parent, right, is to be blamed, because then that would be victim blaming. But what I'm saying is that person needs to also relearn and also needs therapy and also needs support. They both do, because
Yeah.
otherwise they're going to keep falling into the same patterns over and over again.
Well, you keep having this positive and negative
Hmm.
colliding, and even if it's not the same people, same particles, the patterns keep reoccurring, and it creates like a chain reaction. And then, unfortunately, everything we get down to like primary cause, and then like the secondary effects, and secondary effects for these kids because they're going from one unstable relationship to another, or they're witnessing the domestic violence, or they're witnessing this pattern of and my mother was abused and then I saw her get abused again, and then
Hmm.
that becomes their normal.
Correct.
And then they either, becomes a lot of ways the abuser or the person, being victimized. And Betty, we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure there's going to be you'll be back on, and we'll have some definite follow ups. Tell me about your mission statement for your law firm and where you came up with that, and then for non-Spanish speakers, tell us what the name of your law firm means, because I thought that was pretty beautiful when you shared it with me a few weeks ago.
Oh, thank you. So my firm is called Mariposa Law Group. Mariposa is Spanish for butterfly. Now, I am Puerto Rican, so I do speak Spanish, but the I chose mariposa because of the butterfly and the symbolism as it relates to survivors of domestic violence. There's like the phoenix that rises from the ashes and all this stuff, but he just keeps repeating the same one, right? Butterflies, however, you start out as a little grubby worm, then you go into the chrysalis, where pretty much all your cells turn to mush. And this is where a lot of survivors come to me, or a lot of clients, because let's face it, whether there's abuse or not, divorce is traumatic. It is a trauma experience to go through a divorce or a breakup or whatever it is. So when they're there, they're under the covers, they're at home eating pints of ice cream, and you're a mess. And then from that, you have to go through it, right? You have to do the work to be able to feel better and do better. But then you come out on the other side and more beautiful, right? And now you've got new skills. Now you can fly, right? And that's where I see the support and the empowerment being. It's like, we're going to listen, domestic violence or divorce or whatever you've been through is going to change you, right? It's like you become a pickle. You can't go back to being a cucumber. You can't go back to being a caterpillar. Now you can only move forward.
Hmm.
Okay. But it is tough. But once you stick it out, then you're going to be able to do better. So then I wanted to do that, where it's like, yeah, there's challenges, there's endings to relationships. If we're doing a paternity, if we're doing anything, there's some type of ending, right? And I want that to be an opportunity for their new life, their new adventures, and everything else that's in front of them. So that's why I came up with Mariposa. Thank you for asking me.
No, no problem. It reminds me, it's not as eloquent as yours, but one of my expressions is always, you can't live life living in the review, looking in the rearview mirror. You're gonna hit something. And I tell people that we have to like not dwell on the past, that we gotta look to the future, and what kind of future can we build you, and what do we need to get out of this case or that case, or this cause of action. We gotta build that life for you that you want. And it may just be the foundation for that life. And you Miriam, it's a fresh start for you to build upon and get you that good solid foundation. And I think that's very much in line with your butterfly analogy. Like, we're going to make a change, we're transforming, we're moving forward. And sometimes when you move forward, maybe you're not dwelling on the past, but to move forward, you have to really understand the past. There may be a need for therapy, there may be a need for some self-reflection in your journey of moving forward. And that's one of the things I try to stress to clients who have the means or are willing to listen to my advice is, maybe you need to talk to someone in mental health. Maybe you need to take a deeper dive and take the time out to really unpackage everything that you've gone through and deal with the trauma, the stress, everything else. Because if I win the divorce case, and I get you all the money in the world, or I get you, a unequal distribution. If we don't deal with some of the root problems, the root traumas, are you really going to be at 100% healthy to move forward? And you have to be of the right mindset. You have to be, physically and mentally healthy to really prosper in life, no matter what resources you get following a divorce case or any case, no matter what the outcome is. If you're not mentally healthy and you haven't really reflected on everything and processed it, then you really can't move forward if you don't really know what the lessons of the past are. So,
Absolutely.
that's something I stress, but not everybody listens.
I recommend therapy to my clients too. In fact, I try to cover that in the first meeting. I have some clients that are therapists too. I think, but it's what I tell them though is, because I'm very empathetic. So I'm listening and I can feel their pain, right? So I'm like, yeah, I get it. But I'm a lawyer. So what I want you to do is like, do you have somebody else to talk to? Because I can listen to you, and if you need me to listen to, but I'm charging at this rate. I bet you the therapist is going to charge you less. So you want the person to be able to help you to sort that stuff, and that the more that you get your support group or your support elsewhere, the more I can focus on the legal stuff. I'm here for you either way because, sometimes people just need someone to be on their side and people to listen to them. But, I want to make sure that they have someone else to talk to. That's not just me, especially because, as you know, attorneys, we have that, even if we don't mean to be coercive, we do have the power, right? Because we're the professionals, we're the ones with the information. So I want to make sure that they have another safe person to be able to talk to. And like I said, even the best divorce is going to be traumatic. It's a trauma, it's an ending, it's a change, and you need to process that.
I joke around. I do a lot of joking, like in the consults, and I get to know the client. So I find it's a way to kind of hopefully take the edge off and get them to realize that I'm just a person like you. I have my own problems. I don't have a perfect life in all regards, like, and I need you to be transparent. And if I'm not transparent, really showing you who I am and putting my cards on the table, how can I really expect you to give me all the information I need to do well with your case and present your case and get to know you? Because how can I speak for you if I don't really know you or you're not being 100% honest with me? And one of my jokes, like people will ask me, are you good? Are you good? Are you good? And I was like, my dentist is good, but when he gives a root canal, it still hurts, right? No such thing as a good root canal. I was like, there's no such thing as a good divorce.
Hmm.
I was like, it doesn't matter how good the lawyer is, there's going to be trauma, and we are going to be doing something that's very, you know, earth shattering. I joke around. It's like, that just like there's no good surgeon out there that does a good amputation. I was like, it's not measured in good and bad. It's measured in damage control and how much I can mitigate the bad and how much I can mitigate the damage that's going to be done to you either financially, psychologically, can I prevent you from being abused somehow in the process or
Hmm.
becoming a victim somehow?
Hmm.
It's damage control and getting people to realize that I tell them there is no such thing as winning in a divorce. There's no winner. I said the winner would have been if I had a magic wand and could have kept the two of you together and kept your family intact and made everything perfect. But unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand. All I have is this laptop and my law degree, and all I can do is try to mitigate the damage that's going to transpire from this point forward if you'll let me. And for you to really be the best participant in that, you have to be mentally healthy and recognize your own shortcomings, recognize in a constructive way your spouse's shortcomings and how we can work around all that and get back to some positive ground where maybe when your kid graduates high school, it's not blood sport. It's not hurt feelings. You don't have a child who's not looking forward to high school graduation because both parents are going to be there and we can, start now stopping the generational effects that will occur as these kids grow up, from being in an unhealthy situation because the divorce really, no one, people got divorced, but no one took the steps to really correct the problems. We told you again, stay away, we're divorced, but no one addressed the underlying issues as to communication. And I've encouraged clients who went through a divorce that was, a divorce, but no risk of domestic violence.
Hmm.
I have, to my detriment, because sometimes they look at me like I'm crazy, suggested have you just thought about going to counseling after the divorce, not to save the marriage, but to learn to co parent better or
Totally.
to get past some of this so that you know, you keep paying me to come back for contempt motions and modifications
Hmm.
and because you're not co-parenting. And honestly, again, sometimes, a penny worth of prevention would save, in this case, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cure,
Hmm.
just getting down to the root problem and being able to try to address those issues. But so, our time is kind of drawing to an end. So if people want to get in contact with you, Betty, at your new law firm, how do they reach out to you?
Well, I'm serving, as you said, I'm in Orlando, so I do serve the Central Florida area. My office is in Orlando, East Orlando. You can reach me at 407 That's the office number for Mariposa Law Group, or my cell phone, 407-470-4006.
Okay. And Betty, I know that you're kind of busy now. You're starting your own practice, but if people wanted you to come speak on human trafficking or coercive control, are you still open to doing those type of engagements as well?
Absolutely, yes. I love educating people because the more people know, the more opportunities they'll have to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm going to end on one more question. Now I'm going to show my maybe how naive I am, or but you're kind of at the forefront of this, and I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it from somebody who's really studied it. Is there an injunction out there for human trafficking? I know there's
No,
stalking, domestic violence,
there is not.
and I've
No.
wondered that. I thought I knew the answer, but I didn't think there was. And that kind of stunned me that if you're a victim of, sex trafficking or human trafficking, that there's not a specialized injunction to get you out of that situation.
There's no injunction. A lot of the protections that already exist for human trafficking survivors are only those that are flowing from laws that currently support survivors of domestic violence or sexual abuse. So it's those laws that are helping survivors of human trafficking. So we don't have those laws. I mean, they're anti-trafficking laws in Florida. It's criminal, but not there's not an injunction. For example, somebody that's been trafficked may be able to get an injunction if there's been sexual abuse, right? There's a sexual violence injunction, or possibly domestic violence if they have an intimate relationship or they have a child together, right? Because a lot of the traffickers, they end up having children with the people as well, or a repeat violence injunction, but only in the cases where there's been actual physical abuse, right? Or
Right.
a type of violence. Because if it's just all been coercive, or I'm going to have you deported, those things are not really actionable in court. That's not the kind of threat that the state will consider.
And, it's, just like my story, dating back to the child that was, being used as a drug mule.
Hmm.
Isn't it, to me, it's kind of odd and crazy that I could snatch your cell phone out of your hand and get a domestic violence injunction if I've extorted you into being a drug mule and, you're without recourse. And, I think to me, I think that would probably be a good starting point. I don't know why we wouldn't have some kind of an injunction just dedicated toward human trafficking.
So a lot
It's something politicians talk about on the news. Everybody talks about it, and we don't even have a basic injunction process to prevent it unless you're being sexually assaulted or physically assaulted.
And trafficking can happen in a lot of different ways. So I see what you're saying. One, because it could be labor trafficking, it could be sex trafficking, it could be domestic, right? It could be indentured servitude. There's a lot of different facets of trafficking that could be encompassed. I think that's a great idea. So you can sign me up for that. Put me on that mailing list.
Well, maybe the next time somebody busts into a committee meeting, they'll burst out with it. But Betty, look, we will definitely have you back on. We wish you and your law firm and the Central Florida area, nothing but success and growth, and just keep the good fight going and keep people informed. And we'll definitely have you back on and touch base about this some more and provide more information on this great topic. If you tuned in today and you've liked what you've heard, and you're facing some of these problems, whether you're a legal professional or someone who's going through a family law issue, please like, subscribe, share, get the word out. The more people we have on this platform, the more awareness we can bring to these issues, the more people can get good, solid information from people who've got a lot of experience on these various topics, and we can make our community more aware. Lots of things, get started with just people having the basic knowledge of really what's going on. And, the best way you can do that is to help us get the word out and, share our information, share the podcast, and, keep it growing. I think we're getting pretty close to 4,000 subscribers now. So, just keep that going. And, I appreciate you, Betty, taking your time out from growing your practice to inform us all about these, very important issues that are going on. And we can't wait to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. And please give my love to Mary.
I will. Thank you. All right.